Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History is Lunch program. We're in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And we're streaming live on both Facebook and YouTube, where these videos are available to watch anytime afterwards. And if you've not already done so, please silence your cell phones. Our new temporary exhibit of rarely shown flags from the MDAH collection has opened upstairs in the FedEx Exhibition Hall. Admission to the exhibit is free. And tomorrow, March 14th at 11 a.m., there'll be a gallery talk about the United States colored troops in Mississippi by Roscoe Barnes III, Cultural Heritage Tourism Manager at Visit Natchez, and Albert Dorsey Jr., Assistant Professor of History at Jackson State University. So join us for that. Also, this is the last week to apply for the department's Family Genealogy Fellowship, which provides a stipend of up to $3,500 to fund travel and accommodations for 5 days of research on a member of the family at the State Archives. You'll find the application and more details about the fellowship on the MDAH website. You can also register there for our Beginner's Genealogy Workshop at the State Archives on Saturday, April 6th. Finally, I hope you'll join us next week for History's Lunch, when we'll be joined by author Julie Kabat, who will present My Brother's Story of Freedom Summer. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Richelle Putnam and Diane Williams, authors of the new book, A Guide to Mississippi Museums. Richelle Putnam is the Arts Project Director for the Montgomery Institute. She earned her BS in Marketing Management from Western Governors University and her MA in Creative Writing from the University of North Alabama. Putnam's books include Mississippi and the Great Depression, Lauderdale County, Mississippi, A Brief History, and The Inspiring Life of Eudora Welty, which received the 2014 Moonbeam Children's Book Awards Silver Medal. Diane Williams retired from the Mississippi Arts Commission as their Director of Grants. She is the author of The Life and Legacy of B.B. King, a Mississippi blues icon, Mississippi Folk and the Tales They Tell, Myths, Legends, and Bald-Faced Lies, and other works. Williams has been a professional storyteller since 1992 and is a member of the Craftsmen's Guild of Mississippi. Her fiber art has been exhibited in museums, galleries, and on college campuses. Help me welcome Diane Williams and Richelle Putnam.
We're excited to be here because we're excited about museums, and we want you to be just as excited as we are. When it comes to Richelle and I working together, the big elephant in the room is that we listen to one another. We perceive one another's heartbeat on history and what's important. Our relationship goes back many years, from when I was at the Arts Commission and she became one of our roster artists. And then I got to know her when she founded the Mississippi Writers Guild. And we collaborated on working on a book called The Mississippi During the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. I was at the Arts Commission thinking about retiring, and my boss, who's here today, said, you got to finish your work here, you know, if you're going to retire. So I said, Richelle, you know, we had a contract with the publisher. And I said, Richelle, you think you could do this by yourself, write about Mississippi and the Great Depression? Well, I knew she could, because when we would sit down together, she had books piled up almost to the ceiling. So anyway, she carried on, and she graciously asked me to write the foreword for the book. And then the publisher did a coffee table book, and I wrote a different foreword for that particular book. The museum book was her idea, and I was really thrilled that she had asked me to be her partner in that endeavor. And as you can see, we just love one another. I had already known many of the museums in the state. I knew about their directors. I knew what their missions were. I didn't know a lot about the smaller ones.
So when we got together to do this book, when you look at the state of Mississippi and how many museums we were going to have to cover, it could be pretty overwhelming. So Diane came up with the idea of splitting the state in half, and we kind of divided the central part. So Diane took the Delta and the Northeast, and then I took the southern part and part of Central, and Diane also did part of Central Mississippi. I wanted to add, too, that, Diane and I really trusted each other in what we were going to do independently. And that meant so much because I didn't have to worry anything about Diane getting her work done. And I hope that she felt the same way about me. We both felt like we were very even in our skills when it came to research and also our writing skills, and that also helped a lot. Plus, we had both written for the same publisher, and so we knew that publisher as individuals as well as partners.
So before retirement, half my time at the Arts Commission would be out in the field. I started out with the commission as their arts industry director, working with fine art organizations. And so I knew a lot about them, but then also people ask us all the time, well, how did you know about all the museums around the state? Well, the internet is a wonderful place to visit. And I think Visit Mississippi was a great resource for us. The internet was a great resource for us. Getting out there on the road and, there's signage all over the place. I just learned after writing the book there was a tomato museum, So at the time we started, I think it was around 2018, at that time there were over 300 museums in the state that we had on our list. And then the pandemic hit and museums started closing up temporarily, full-time, so our research became very interesting. We had to ask our publisher, could we put the book on hold, because we didn't know what this pandemic was all about, how long it was going to last, who was going to even live through it. And so we just kind of held out for a little while, hoping that we could still get that contract back on the table. And my thing, I'm a professional storyteller, so I love backstory, y'all. And I had written so much about the backstory of some of these museums. And we started a Facebook page. It's under a different title than the book, but we were able to share some things as we were uncovering information about museums, and people shared information with us as well. So the buzz started getting out there. We learned that there was some real interest in what museums were all about.
And as we got into our research, and before the pandemic, we were visiting pretty good, but we soon really realized that research went so far beyond the buildings and just the exhibits themselves. When you met the people who were involved with these museums, the entrepreneurial spirits, the volunteers, the nonprofit organizations, those who were instrumental in the planning and just the implementation, you saw the passion behind all these museums. I covered the Research the South, so I was able to really talk to a lot of the directors and volunteers at the museums after Katrina. And those stories were so inspirational, but they were also so emotional because so many of them had to rebuild from scratch their musicians. So museums became to me so much more than just the artifacts within them.
When the contract was put back on the table for us to resume writing, one day Richelle asked me, how many words have you written so far? I hadn't even looked at that. I was just passionate and the words were just flowing. The research was flowing. And I looked at my computer and found out, now we had a contract to write 45,000 words total covering the state. I had written 55,000 words by myself. And I said, well, Richelle, what should I do? She said, talk to the publisher. And we've learned that publishers, when more than one person is on the contract, they don't like to hear all of your voices. They just want somebody to take the lead and have one voice coming at them. So she said, well, why don't you see what the publisher, what the commissioning editor would say? And he said, we're not going to publish all of that. That would be 2 books. We'd have to send it to outside editors. Da, 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 da. Well, I have other publishers as well, and so I knew how to talk to him, and I said, well, tell me, what should I do? And he said, build a website. So we now have a website. It's ongoing. It's like what a blog is. What it's not a blog, but it's sort of like that, where we're continually adding information. So you could go to MississippiMuseumsGuide.com. And so anytime people share updates with us, once we validate that, we'll put that up on our website.
So as Diane said, you know, it wasn't just the writing process, but we had a very strict editing process. And I'm a brutal editor, which is what I kind of do full-time in my field as well. And so, but Diane trusted me enough to take all those beautiful words that she had written and cut them into workable space within the book, because we also had pictures to think about and those kind of things. But we were so proud of our effort in our writing and editing, because once we sent the manuscript in, our editor said, well, you know, we don't have much to edit here. It's a really clean manuscript. So we want to boast about that.
Absolutely. And part of our contract was to get a minimum of 45 pictures to put in the book. That's sort of the schematic that the history press likes to use. And so I'm not a photographer, but I know people who are. I'm proud to say that award-winning photographers' images are included in the book, and that's Rory Doyle. He's won a fellowship from the Mississippi Arts Commission, and I think from Southern Arts Federation. Just his work is just stellar. So it's that kind of images we have in the book, and that was important because the publisher publishes in black and white.
And I think as we went through this process, Diane and I both gained much more confidence as writers and feeling capable of approaching editors and publishers with what we want, you know, and not just what they want. And I think that helped us to develop tremendously as both writers and editors and co-writers together. And we even came up with a bunch of new project ideas. We hope we'll be doing that one day too. But we want to get to talking about museums, because that's what this is really all about. We have the privilege of being in one of or two of the greatest museums right now in Mississippi. What is the purpose of a museum? Well, the short answer is to collect, preserve, and educate. But I think as you go through the book, and even as you have visited museums yourself, we discover that it's much more than artifacts and historical documentation. Museums display the courage and the inspiration and the determination, the hospitality, the truth, and the spirit of the people that they are representing, and the times, from the 1927 flood to the yellow fever epidemic to the pandemic, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights era, from cotton fields to the coastal waters. Museums share that history with us, share not only with us, but with our children. They provide exploration, experiences, and opportunities, even to question that history, because so much happens in history that was not good. And we need to know that history. We need to teach that history. We need to know about our geography and our genealogy. And museums help us just to gain a deeper knowledge, while providing new knowledge about all the subject areas that they cover. And they do this in multiple perspectives, because Mississippi is made up with so many different cultures and so many different ethnicities, and it helps us to understand each other and where we all come from. So that helps us facilitate those conversations that we need to understand each other and cross over certain barriers that may still be there in some areas.
we're sharing this part of our information sharing with you because we are ambassadors for these museums around the state. People, every now and then somebody says, why should I go to a museum? What's in a museum? There is so much, and I told Richelle we couldn't leave this section out. How do museums contribute to communities? The enjoyment of spending time with others together in museums. It creates a storytelling experience when you go into museums. Sometimes you can, and by the way, museums information, every now and then you'll find a website where you can have a virtual tour. So museums are accessible to everyone. There's virtual tours, and there's also self-guided tours and interactive experiences that can happen. And sometimes you can find tour guides and curators that will take you around and explain things to you. There's intellectual stimulation that supports your cognitive health. Feeling connected with humankind. You know, we could stay in our houses all the time. I know there was a pandemic, but museums are a great place. You know, if you're solo or if you're with a group, it's a great place to go. Reduces stress levels. There's a sense of safety, security, and certainty when going into museums. Quiet space, sense of joy, beauty, and wonder for our lives. Feeling seen by having perspectives or the history of people like me, like you, represented in these museums. People ask me sometimes, well, what information is in museums about African Americans? Well, I can, off the top of my head, name for you over 30 museums that really highlight the African American culture or the Jewish culture and so forth and so on. Improvement of mental health, you find that from museums. So bringing people together to explore and discuss Mississippi's identity. We need that right now because we want to establish who we really are, you know? We're not that we have a past, but we're not just the past. You can share and explore different viewpoints with others. There's partnership and collaborations that happen in museums. They create greater cultural literacy, important to our society, and provide engagement with the community. There's lectures and like this that happen in museums, and they encourage stronger connections to others.
We should introduce Malcolm.
Yes, we're going to stop right now. Malcolm White, many of you may know him. He's done a lot in our state, and Malcolm White was the former executive director of the Mississippi Arts Commission and Visit Mississippi. He's an advocate for the arts and arts education around our state, and you share that part about the economy.
Well, I mean, he basically spearheaded the creative economy in Mississippi, and I was so blessed to be a part of that through the Montgomery Institute, and we did a creative economy forum in Meridian. And I'll just say this about the Mississippi Arts Commission because that's how Diane and I became connected. These organizations are so critical to our economy, and this is just a perfect platform to say, please support these organizations that bring, that understand tourism and the dollars that tourism brings in. And museums are one of the biggest drawers or magnets for tourists to come into Mississippi.
And so we've mentioned Malcolm White's name for a reason. And could you just stand so everybody will know who you are? I know everybody knows you. But Malcolm wrote the foreword to the book, and we could not have asked a better person to write the foreword because he clearly understands what the impact of the creative economy means to the state of Mississippi.
So museums, in the way of bringing people in to our communities to spend dollars in our restaurants and hotels, they do that because they're informative, they're engaging, they're motivating, they're entertaining, and they expose the tourists that come from all over the world to our culture.
They contribute to the quality of life in Mississippi.
They showcase diversity and variety, and they welcome visitors from other cultures from around the world.
They connect us with content in deep and personal ways.
And engage us, and from time to time, they evolve and they showcase things that are new history that has come to light.
They host special events, exhibition openings, parties, art talks, enjoyable programs, classes, demonstrations, lectures, story time, hands-on content, art learning, children's programming, outreach, and collaboration with communities and connection to artists.
And as we kind of said before, it allows us and others to recognize and understand each other. And if anyone needs more understanding in this world, it is Mississippi.
And they support guidance for child development.
They encourage greater empathy and kindness towards others.
They encourage more conscientiousness about the impact of our behaviors and how those behaviors affect others.
And through the exhibits that they display, we can really experience these past lives and past eras and past events.
And they present a visitor-centered experience.
Multiple artists, perspectives.
And place-based storytelling venues. That's who they are.
And I think that one of the things I love most about museums are all the programs that they provide, not only to our children, for them to come in and have hands-on experiences with the exhibits, but adults of all ages. They offer access to programs with visual, hands-on, and performing arts experiences. They have exceptional interactive displays that everyone can experience that history and foster exploration and provide materials and space for the actual creation of art. Many museums offer teacher programs where they can get CEUs, and they work with the public schools to have school tours. They have teaching resources that are available online, but they also spark creativity, and that alone improves critical thinking skills in all of us, not just our kids. And also, what I love about museums is that they are not self-centered. Museums love each other, and they support each other, and they send visitors to other museums in the areas because we all work together, and that history is a cohesive unit, even though we may be covering totally different subjects.
And our museums tell the truth. You want to know the truth about Mississippi? Visit your local museums.
So we're just going to share a couple of our favorite museums. I'm going to let Diane start.
Okay, I think let's identify some of the pictures
Okay.
you're seeing on the screen right
Sure.
now. Let's see. I think you're more familiar with some of these. I see the Grammy Museum at the top in the center.
Okay, Tennessee Williams. That's a Traintastic down here, which is on the Gulf Coast. This is the Meridian Museum of Art. This is Soleil, which is also in Meridian. And I think that, do you remember?
There's another civil rights museum, that's in Belzona, and that woman in the heart, that's my play mama, she's passed on, her name is Jimmy Marie Wright.
This is the depot in Bay St. Louis, and it houses the tourism, but it also houses several museums. Their Mardi Gras Museum, the Alice Mosley Museum, and of course the Grammy Museum, and then I think that's Beauvoir up there on the coast as well. So.
And those two little children, those are my grandchildren.
Oh.
Okay, could we look at the next slide and identify those pictures as well?
Oh, yes.
Um,
I'm going to let you come over here.
I pause because we mentioned earlier that some of the museums have closed, and it's so sad because a lot of these places are just quality facilities. The Tupelo Automobile Museum, you could see some of the cars that they had, an incredible collection. But I was happy to find out there's a new museum in Corinth called, I think it's called Classic Riders with a Z, R-I-D-E-R-Z, that has 8 of the cars from the Tupelo Automobile Museum. I don't know what happened to the rest of them, but this was wonderful to have this fabulous museum in our state. And the top over on the right, that's from the Mississippi Craftsman Center. We had to make a determination, what is a museum? We've talked about what's in them, but what identifies them as a museum? If they have a collection, and if what they have is curated so that visitors can be informed as to what they're seeing. So that's why we included the Craftsman's Guild, which is in Ridgeland. And then you have a picture down here on the bottom. Oh, did I step on?
That's okay. There.
I don't have periphery. The picture on the bottom, the picture in the middle and the top that says washerwoman, and this one here, my reading is going to be related to those 3 pictures. That's one place. So now we'll share a little reading with you. And the ironic thing about this reading is this is not in the book, because why would we read everything in the book?
Because you're going to do that.
You know, we want you to do that and find it interesting. This is, I don't think this, well, anyway. They call it the room. They call it a rental hall, events and concert facility. It's also known as Johnny Bootsy Morrow's Museum. Anybody ever heard of it? It's in Jackson, Mississippi. One hand went up. Privately owned. So this will give you the breadth of what some of the privately owned museums were about. We related to public facilities in the book, but some of these private-owned facilities are incredible. And this was at 421 West Woodrow Wilson Boulevard. I'm going to read, but understand that I'm reading from when I initially wrote this, because Johnny Bootsy is no longer with us. So I'm going back. If you travel 1 block west of what is known as 5 Points in Jackson, Mississippi, you will see a building that once served as an industrial uniform operation with swinging doors that never closed. When the facility was in operation on any given day, approximately 126 women worked around the clock. The operation was known as the slave ship. There is an incredible history in the hollows of this building that reflect the plight of washerwomen as well as school children who would work to get the job done. The history of washerwomen across the United States is one that represents low wages, long hours, and its history dates back to 1866. The working conditions in industrial uniform laundries was such that it led to disease and mistreatment, leaving the women in Jackson and other places no other recourse than to form labor unions to fight against the oppression. Driving west on Woodrow Wilson Boulevard, one can very easily pass by what is no longer known as the washerwoman's laundry workplace. There is a reference to the laundry service on the front of the building, and there is also a sign reading "The Room." The building does not look like a public facility, and it is not. It is a compound that houses an incredible number of collectibles. Even though some of the most well-known individuals have graced the compound, the museum is housed in those buildings. And I would add that Johnny Morrow's facility rivals any museum in the state of Mississippi with the collection and memorabilia that he had. It could have been one of our largest in the state, really. Who is Johnny Morrow? He is the first African-American car wholesaler in the state of Mississippi. He appraised cars. Morrow drives an old raggedy Cadillac, and yet he was known as the #1 car wholesaler in the state, black or white. He took over. Morrow's antique vehicles have been seen in films like Selma, The Help, and Mississippi Burning. Most recently, his vehicles have been used in the new movie called Jacob's Wife. Filmmakers know Morrow and enjoy using Morrow's building for after parties as well. Morrow has been able to get a bus that was instrumental in policing activities during the Civil Rights era. When the Smithsonian Institute found out that he had it, they wanted it. The bus is the greatest bus in the history of Mississippi, according to Morrow. People get it confused with the Thompson tank. His bus is known as Mobile Unit 735 and was under the control of the state's governors. It served under 5 governors. It is the bus that blocked the gates from James Meredith entering when he was trying to go to school at Ole Miss. It is the bus that went out to Jackson State University when the students were killed during the Civil Rights Movement. It is the bus that that took Stokely Carmichael to jail in Greenwood. It has a deep, dark history. But according to the folks that wanted to get it back from Morrow, the history of the bus is that it would be used during hurricane storms, catching escaped prisoners, and other emergency support activities. Ross Barnett had a lot to do with that bus. The bus traveled all over the state during the Civil Rights Movement. When Martin Luther King spoke at Tougaloo College, the bus was parked out in the field, and at that time it had an antenna on it that rose 100 feet in the air. It was a 1950s bus. The bus was involved in some of the darkest days of segregation. The archives for the Mississippi Highway Patrol is home to a huge area that reflects on the history and paperwork documenting the activities of the bus. Morrow said he would do almost anything to get his hands on that paperwork. It tells the story of the movement in Mississippi. Someone broke into Morrow's museum a few years ago and set the bus on fire. He believes they set it on fire because of the Smithsonian's desire to acquire the bus. He believed they knew about the building of the new Civil Rights Museum, and they must have figured out that the bus would probably go on display at the new museum. They did not want that history explored, and therefore gasoline was used to ignite a fire in an attempt to destroy the bus. To this date, most whites do not know that the bus even exists. Because the bus was made of iron, it was not destroyed, but the surveillance equipment, which was way ahead of its time, burned on the inside of the bus. Congressman Benny Thompson tried to get Morrow to donate the bus to the Civil Rights Museum. Morrow's office houses many sports player memorabilia. He knows every basketball and football player that he has displayed on his walls Hall of Fame. He knew a lot of the NFL and NBA ball players, and he worked with the chapter of Mississippi's former and retired players. Walk into the warehouse on the right and you immediately become engaged in an experiential tour that rivals any public museum. The first thing you will notice is the nightclub atmosphere. The room is the size of a half football field, so I thought, with 10 to 15 two-seater leather recliners on one side of the room, tables painted with well-known civil rights activists on the other side. Those tables were painted by a homeless man who stopped by one day in hopes of securing employment. Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, Stokely Carmichael, James Meredith, and others were painted by the talented homeless folk artists. James Meredith had visited the facility, and Morgan Freeman was a dear friend. There's a wet bar, casino machine jingling and ready for monetary consumption, but they are just collectibles. In the far corner, hanging on the wall, are authentic African face masks. The owner, Johnny Bootsy Morrow, is always ready to take you on a tour. His facility is well curated, and each alcove is thematic. The first thing he will say when he meets you is, "Hello. What you are seeing right now is a sampling of all that we have here. You ain't seen nothing yet." The facility is amazing. There is a projection of a film on the west wall that is the size of a movie theater screen. Along another wall, the word Bootsy lights up in red capital letters. The sign is large, close to the size of a four-door sedan car. Johnny Morrow will always have a film running the entire time of the tour. He can be seen narrating the history of Jackson, Mississippi. Morrow has been fortunate enough during his garage sale hunting journeys to stumble onto some incredible finds. He is clear about the recipe that has made his collection a success. Going to garage sales, he said that when an old person dies, The family sells everything at estate sales or garage sales, and Morrow comes in and purchases all the good stuff. He finds great treasures that way. There is a section with posters from every Mississippi festival. Although he has inventoried his collection, he is not a historian. Morrow is an entrepreneur. He offers a VIP pickup with his antique cars. B.B. King, Morgan Freeman, Muhammad Ali, Jesse Jackson, Bill Clinton, they all have hired his vehicles for limousine service. When the movie The Help was being filmed, the industry contacted Morrow to see if his cars could be used in the film. Dan Aykroyd has been to his place to chill out with Tate Taylor. They called it the cool out spot. When the movie Get On Up, a film about the life of James Brown, was being filmed, the film industry used Morrow's cars. He has been fortunate that when a film is produced in Mississippi that reflects on the time period of his antique cars, the industry will call on him. I'm going to skip a little bit and tell you about some of the cars. A 1968 Silver Shadow, 66 Corniche Rolls Royce convertible, a 1944 Porsche, and on, just some incredible vehicles. I'm going to skip again because some of his vehicle, he secured a vehicle when his cousin called him from a gas station in Texas and said, you know, they got one of the vehicles that was in the motorcade when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. He had that vehicle at his place. The place is incredible. I have listed here just so much that was in there, and again, it was thematic. For African Americans in the room, he had almost every Jet and I think almost every Ebony magazine, and that is some kind of collection. Just amazing things were housed in the museum. I think he had the sign from the 930 Blues Club. He had an elevator from King Edward Hotel. Just amazing things. So in conclusion, Johnny Morrow has a vast collection of antiques and memorabilia. He was not a young man at the time of this writing, so it is ironic that he had not at that time determined what would happen to his collection if he died. To his advantage, everything in his collection, I think I mentioned before, is curated, organized, and inventoried. It is incredible.
So I'm just going to share, I'm not going to do a reading because I love to go into rabbit holes. And I wanted to share with you just a couple of short rabbit holes because I want all of you to learn to go into rabbit holes, to learn more about the history that you see in museums. One of my favorite museums was one in Hattiesburg, the African American Military Museum. Now, it's housed in the surviving USO facility that was specifically constructed for African Americans in the United States. Probably everyone knows the USO or the United Service Organizations. They provided refreshments, amenities like stationery to write letters. They had sleeping quarters. They did uniform repair services, had records, and facilitated religious services, and they even distributed Bibles. Well, the museum in Hattiesburg has a very extensive exhibit about the Buffalo soldiers. Now, one of Diane and I, my real good friends, Terrence Roberts, traced his history back to a Buffalo soldier, and he loves telling that history. They were established by Congress in 1866. They were initially 6 regiments and consolidated into 4, but they played vital roles in the post-Civil War reconstruction efforts and frontier conflicts during the Plains War. But it was the Plains War Indians that actually named them the Buffalo Soldiers because they resembled to them the buffalo because of their real curly hair and their fierce combat prowess. And that nickname stuck. And the rabbit hole is, of course, this is at the museum. It is the only remaining facility in the United States that was specifically built for African American soldiers. But on the USO national website, they have some wonderful history about Hattiesburg because of that. They actually have 2 films on their site that refer back to our Hattiesburg and that particular building as being the only one left. The museum in Hattiesburg also provides a lot of programming and that also aligns to the state and national standards. One of the other, and that's the museum there, and that's the tank on the premises. The other one is Forks of the Road, which is not actually a museum, as you can see, but it actually is a part of the Natchez Museum of African American History, because again, that's what museums do. They send you out so that you can see other areas where our history took place. Now, Natchez, which is older than New Orleans, and a lot of people don't even, realize that a lot of times, but it was the nucleus of capitalism in the United States. It had 3 vital commodities. It had land, cotton, and enslaved African individuals. Natchez had one of the second largest slave market in the South. It originally was downtown Natchez, but when the cholera epidemic happened, they wanted to move the slave market out beyond the city limits. So they moved it out to where Liberty Road and Devereux Drive merge, and that's why it's called Forks of the Road. But this is the interesting history that I love, because from 1833 to 1863, tens of thousands of enslaved individuals had been transported from Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, the Carolinas, and they were auctioned at that Natchez market. Well, the autumn of 1863, the 12th Wisconsin Infantry that was stationed in Natchez was ordered to dismantle the slave pens at the Forks of the Road. And this is where history can also get somewhat emotional too, because assisting in this effort was the newly formed 58th Regiment of the U.S. Colored Troops. Now, some of the soldiers who were in that 58th Regiment had been sold there at that market. They had been restrained with iron shackles. They had been confined in dismal dungeons until the transactions were completed, and now they would be the ones to tear them down. That's why I want you to go into rabbit holes, because history is not just books and papers and documents, it's emotion and experiences, and that's what we want you to do through our book.
We want to thank you all for listening to the presentation. None of what we said is in the book, so get the book, and we hope that we piqued your interest. Again, the book has just short excerpts, and we're going to put more of the backstory on the Mississippi Museum's guide.com, so you can go there now and check things out. But we'd like to open the floor for questions and answers at this time, if you have any. Yes.
Well, I tell you, hang on, I'll bring the microphone to you. Let me.
First off, I enjoyed your presentation very much. I taught at Mississippi Valley State for 30 years, and periodically would make the trip over to Cottonlandia. I think its name's changed by now. And the thing that always impressed me about Cottonlandia was how it really gave the geological and the wildlife history of the Delta, as well as the human history.
That is right. It is now the Museum of the Mississippi Delta. And I had an opportunity to look at a lot of those native artifacts and things. But I think at the time that I looked at it many years ago, and I'll just skip over and say, I hope that it has been better curated and identified to its time period. But there's also from the military war wars. I don't know which particular wars, but some of the old implementation that was used during war, maybe to pull teeth, do things like that. So you can get a lot of history about cotton. This is in Greenwood, by the way, about cotton and planting and all those implements and tools. Yes, very interesting museum. And about LaFleur. Yeah.
I'm guessing from your presentation that Mr. Morrow is no longer with us.
Yeah, right, he is no longer with us.
So did he get an opportunity to secure his collection before, are the artifacts, okay?
There's a lady here that's recognized. Do you know more about about his museum? You may know more than I do.
I do not know what happened after his passing. My group from Lanier Junior Senior High School was interested in his collection because when they were discarding stuff from Lanier, he grabbed it all up and took it to the room.
That's what they called it, the room. Mm-hmm.
And he was friends with a lot of my classmates, so we got to tour the museum.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
When I talked to him, he said that his children, and if they're here, I'm sorry, but at that time, they were not interested. It was a lot of, it rivaled this museum here, it really did. And so it would be hard to get your family to want to get involved and help with something like that. But he did tell me he had organized it so that someone would know what it was, and I don't know the details of that, but I just kept encouraging. And there's a, you know, the papers they hid, not hid, but they locked them up, state government. He had his hands on some of those films and videos. Did somebody know what
Mississippi Sovereignty
Thank
Commission?
you. He had I can never think of that. But he had some films that I won't even talk about right now. We can talk about that on the side. That was.
We may do a book about it.
Yeah, you've been interested in that, so yeah.
I was interested in whether you have an understanding of how the Grammy Museum came to be located in Cleveland, Mississippi.
And I remember when it was open. Malcolm, do you remember how that came about? I know there were some individuals up there.
Yeah, there was a group of people from Cleveland who wanted it.
Yeah.
They basically lobbied the Grammy organization to consider putting it there, and they raised a lot of money. They developed a partnership with Delta State to donate the land, and they went year after year to the Grammy Awards and sort of developed a relationship with NARAS, the Grammy Association, and sort of recruited it to come to Cleveland, Mississippi. So it was a community effort and a partnership between locals, the city of Cleveland, the state of Mississippi, Delta State University, and the Grammy, the NARAS, the Grammy Association.
And a lot of times this is what happens, especially with our smaller museums, is people in the community that care about their community and care about their assets, their geography, their topography, their people. You know, I think it's in Amory, and I'm getting old, y'all. In Amory, that the museum cared about the African American churches in the surrounding area and helped to document that important history, so that the community could have it.
I was curious about what happened to the Morrow collection, so I Googled it, and there was an auction on October the 3rd, 2022. And according to if you Google it, it's got pictures of everything that was in the museum.
Wow.
Oh, I've got
We'll have to
find
look.
that. Thank you. Thank you for Googling that.
It's estatesales.org, but it's the Johnny Bootsy Mora collection in Jackson, Mississippi. That is the one you were talking about, right?
Yes. Amazing, amazing. And a lot of us didn't know about that. Did you all know that there's a museum inside the Iron Horse Grill downtown Jackson? Upstairs, there's a wax museum, and do you know how much it costs to create a wax image? And you walk in there, and it's one of the nicest little
It
museums
is.
you ever did see. I'm from New Jersey. I don't miss New Jersey. Everything is right here in Mississippi.
Thanks for that very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
I wanted to piggyback off my friend, Professor Venturini. I too was at Mississippi Valley State University, and I too visited Cottonlandia Museum in the Delta there. And what I found amazing was, it's a tiny, small museum, and it really has a lot with Native American culture. And I found it amazing because it is so small, and it has very little to do with the Delta, where you had cotton plantation, which cotton production, which made Mississippi the richest state in the United States in the 1830s and 40s and 50s before the Civil War. And it's amazing that such a vast industry, agriculture, slavery, plantations, such a vast enterprise had such little representation at Cottonlandia. And I know you did, you have mentioned something about it, slavery at Natchez. But we're talking about an industry that made Mississippi the greatest state in the United States in the 1830s and 40s. And I'm wondering why there's not been a museum, agriculture museum, to celebrate and to, it shows all the requirements that you've talked about. And it's amazing that you don't have an industry to reflect the vast importance of the agricultural industry in the United States.
And maybe that's why they changed their name. But if you go on up to Clarksdale, you will find the Aaron Cotton Company Museum in Clarksdale, Mississippi.
One of the things I've enjoyed it, I'm gonna buy at least 3 of the books today. But one of the things that I'm a strong proponent of is edutourism. Your book is going to do a lot to promote that notion of just traveling up and down the state and pulling off the beaten path every once in a while. But my question is, it's kind of a two-parter. One of them is, I'm amazed, because I know museums are very high maintenance and expensive, how one of the poorest states in the Union could have, what, 400 museums?
There were 300. We now can account for over 220.
Oh, 220. That's still a lot for 80 counties. I'm curious as to what has been the underlying motivation for individuals or communities, as small as they are, to create that many museums. And the second part is, do you think having your book and having it online will help cross-fertilize notions inside of all of the museums as to light bulbs going off? We can also do this and do it virtually.
I think that just shows the passion that goes behind the ideas, the facilitation, the gathering of people in the community. It takes the community to do these things. And when you get a group of people together who have a passion to tell a certain history, whether it's their history or a history that really affected them and their ancestors, you can do wonders. But I would also say this to everyone who is a part of a community. Support your museums. If they have memberships, be a member. If they have events, go to their events. If they are free, send them a check. Every one of these museums has to be maintained, just like you said, and it's impossible to do so without community support. And that's one of the main things we would love for our book to be able to just build that energetic notion to support our museums. Do you want to address the second?
Yeah, when we were on Next Stop Mississippi on MPB Radio on Friday live, the tourists Visit Mississippi was there with us, and they were saying, this is a great resource. We're going to pass this all. Oh, there they are. Well, the gentleman, Kamal, I believe was his name, Kamel King, and he was saying that, you could take this book, and so Jermaine Flood said it as well. You can take this book, we've got a map in the back if you're not as familiar with our state. There's a map there. There's no table of contents or anything. We have the book separated by regions, but what you find in the book, you didn't hear it all today, so you need a copy of the book. You can't say, I'm going to the website and everything I want is there, because it's not. Some of that backstory, those 55,000 words I wrote that I was passionate about, that's where I'm
And rabbit holes.
And rabbit holes. That's what we're putting on the website. But we can envision bed and breakfasts, and teachers using the book as a resource, anybody. You should have, I still do keep an arboretum book in my car so I can learn about trees. You need a guide to Mississippi museums in your car as you're going up and down the highway. You pass on, I think it's I-55 going south, and you pass the Tomato Museum. Well, that's not in the book because it was important that we included things that are curated, really open to the public. We'll put the Tomato Museum on our website, I promise. But sometimes they're just not quite there. But communities love to share. Mississippi communities love to share who they are, what they are, why they're here, and they do it through their museums. And finally, museums tell the truth. Thank you.
Yeah.
I see another hand. The only evaluations, anything close to an evaluation would be when I was at the Arts Commission and we brought in adjudicators to review grant applications for some of these museums. That helped them to understand if they're doing a good job, because our judges would look over those applications and determine what recommendations, what level of recommendations they should be funded at.
Besides this museum, what was the one museum out of your book that you say to a person, you just got to go to?
We knew that question was going to come up, and you answer it.
For me, it would be the Maritime Museum. I'm sorry, and I always bring it up. You've got to come up with other museums, but I love their story. You've got to hear their stories about how they built after Katrina, and their exhibits are just incredible.
I can't name one, so I'm going to name a place. Vicksburg. I love the stories behind the Civil War. I love understanding what that time period, and I even write about that time period. So Vicksburg would be, you could just spend a couple of weeks in Vicksburg alone, and there's a fairly new Civil War museum that was started there that I think is very important. It's started by a man named, I think his name was Charles Pendleton, an African-American that started it after going to gun shows around the community, the region, and he started his own Civil War museum that is one of the most incredible. Thank you.
No, I'm Maggie Lowry with Visit Mississippi, and Kamel's my colleague. And I got my invitation from Chris for History is Lunch about your book, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going. Because this is very comprehensive as far, like, on your categories of open to the public and all that stuff. And I mean, I was carrying it around the office yesterday. Kamel got me this copy Friday, and everybody's like, well, is this in there? Is this in there? And I was like, yes, it is. Why, yes, it is. So, you know, we have museums all over the state. We have an apron museum.
Mm-hmm.
We have
Yeah.
a bridge museum. You know, they're all over. They're on various categories and everything like that, and you never know where you're going to fall into one. So I'm thrilled to have this, and I'm thrilled about the website that's coming up that's going to expand my my list of museums. So this will be
Thank you.
great.
I will make a point that our publisher did say that as museums may sadly close and then new ones open, we will be up, they will do new editions. So we were excited about that too.
It's a great addition to the travel guide for the guides collection for the state.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've come to the top of another hour. Thank you all for being here today. We do have copies of the Guide to Mississippi Museums for sale over here, and it really is a great publication. I encourage you to all come take a look. If you didn't get a chance to ask a question, or if you have a comment for Richelle and Diane, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer those while they're signing. Come back next week when we'll have Julie Cabat here. It's our first Freedom Summer presentation of the year, but there'll be more coming up. For now, help me thank Richelle Putnam and Diane Williams for this fantastic program today.